I never expected that a faulty elevator would be the thing to dismantle the life I had so carefully constructed. My world was a fortress of solitude, built from routine and predictability. Each day was a perfect replica of the one before. Coffee at 7, design briefs until noon, a solitary lunch at my desk, and the quiet hum of my computer until the city lights began to blur through my office window. It was a safe existence, an orderly one. The walls I had built around myself were high and thick, designed not to keep others out, but to keep my own chaotic heart in. And then there was Julian Vance. He was the architect. Not my architect, but the lead at the firm on the 17th floor, one above my graphic design agency on the 16th. He existed in a different stratum of the corporate ecosystem, a place of blueprints and steel, of tangible creation. I dealt in pixels and fonts, in things that existed only on a screen. He built the world I lived in. He was a fixed point in my day, a brief, recurring disturbance in my carefully calibrated orbit. I would see him in the lobby in the morning, a tall, solid presence in a perfectly tailored suit, a stark contrast to my own creative casual uniform of dark jeans and muted sweaters. He was like a piece of classical sculpture I was permitted to observe in a museum, all clean lines and quiet strength. His shoulders were broad, filling the space he occupied with an easy, unassuming confidence. His hair was the color of dark coffee, a little longer on top, always looking like he'd just run a hand through it. But it was his voice that undid me. In the close confines of the elevator, when he'd answer a call or speak quietly to a colleague, it was a low, calm rumble, a sound like distant thunder that vibrated through the metal floor and straight into my bones. It was a sound that promised stability, a stark counterpoint to the constant, anxious thrumming beneath my own skin. I had constructed an entire mythology around him, built from these fleeting observations. The way he smelled, a clean, subtle scent of what I guessed was sandalwood and freshly ironed linen, was the scent of competence. The way he would rub the back of his neck when studying a document on his phone was a sign of deep thought. The faint crinkles that appeared at the corners of his dark eyes when he offered a polite, close-lipped smile to the security guard were evidence of a gentle soul. He was a complete narrative, written by me, for me. A story I could enjoy from a safe distance. The primary reason for this distance, the foundational rule of the museum, was the barrier of perceived impossibility. He was Julian Vance, senior, successful, and exuding an aura of settled, conventional masculinity that screamed, wife and 25 kids in the suburbs sometimes. A simple, unadorned gold band would appear on his left ring finger. It wasn't always there, which was a strange and torturous detail. Its presence was a declarative statement, a full stop. Its absence was a comma, a brief, tantalizing pause that my foolish heart would try to read into. I decided it meant he was married, and on the days he forgot his ring, he was simply a man who had rushed out of his lovely, sun-drenched home after kissing his beautiful wife goodbye. He was unattainable, a masterpiece locked behind velvet ropes and a pane of shatterproof glass. And that, I told myself, was for the best. Admiration was safe. Yearning, from a distance, was manageable. It was the hope of connection that was dangerous. Hope was the wrecking ball to the fortress walls. My life was a grid, and he was a beautiful, disruptive element I had carefully cordoned off. I could appreciate his form, his symmetry, the quiet power he projected, but I could never allow him to bleed into the other squares of my life. He was the morning elevator ride up, the occasional shared space in the lobby cafe, the brief glance in the revolving door on the way out. Nothing more. My routine was my armor, and my secret admiration was a small, private indulgence, a silent acknowledgement of a beauty I could never possess. It was a quiet ache, a familiar companion in my self-imposed solitude. I had made my peace with it, or so I believed. The storm had been threatening all day, pressing against the city with a low, bruised sky. It finally broke in the late afternoon, a torrential downpour that turned the windows of our 16th floor office into abstract waterfalls. It was the kind of weather that encouraged everyone to flee the city early, to scurry home to warmth and light. But I had a deadline. A major branding project for a new client was due, and the client was notoriously demanding. So I stayed, cocooned in the glow of my monitor, tweaking logos and adjusting kerning while the office around me emptied out, the sounds of keyboards and ringing phones fading into a deep, enveloping silence. By the time I finally leaned back, my eyes burning and my spine a single, rigid column of tension, the clock on my screen read 9:47 p.m. The rain was still lashing against the glass, a relentless, percussive rhythm. I was the last one left. I saved my work, shut down my machine, and gathered my things, the silence of the office now feeling less like peace and more like a profound emptiness. The building felt hollow, a great concrete shell echoing with the ghost of the workday. I walked to the elevator bank, my footsteps unnervingly loud on the polished floor. One of the cars arrived with a soft chime, its doors sighing open. I stepped inside, the familiar scent of industrial cleaner and stale air a small comfort. I pressed the button for the lobby, and the doors began to slide shut. Just before they sealed, a hand shot through the gap, and they smoothly retracted. Julian Vance stepped in. My heart didn't just leap. It felt like it tripped, fell down a flight of stairs, and landed in a heap at the bottom of my stomach. He looked tired. His tie was loosened, the top button of his crisp white shirt was undone, and the jacket of his suit was slung over his arm. He offered me a small, weary smile. "Burning the midnight oil?" he asked. His voice, that low, rumbling sound, now amplified by the small, enclosed space. It filled every corner of the elevator car, of my head. I managed to nod, my own voice feeling like a foreign object in my throat. "Big deadline." I croaked, then cleared my throat. "You too," it wasn't a question. "Always," he said, a hint of wry humor in his tone. He leaned against the wall opposite me, and the doors slid shut, sealing us inside. The car began its descent, a smooth, humming glide. For 16 floors, I had to exist in this tiny metal box with the living, breathing embodiment of my most private, foolish daydreams. I focused on the changing numbers above the door. 15, 14. I could feel the warmth radiating from him across the small space. I could smell the sandalwood, now mingled with the faint, clean scent of rain on his coat. Between the 10th and 9th floors, it happened. There was a sound like a great, metallic groan from somewhere above us. The elevator car jerked violently, throwing me off balance. I stumbled forward, my hands flying out to brace myself against the wall. Then came a sickening lurch, a drop of what felt like several feet, and a final, shuddering, definitive stop. The humming died. The numbers above the door went dark. For a moment, we were suspended in absolute blackness and a silence so profound it roared in my ears. Then, the main lights flickered and died, replaced a second later by the weak, greenish-yellow glow of a single emergency light in the ceiling. It cast long, dancing shadows, turning the familiar, sterile box into a strange, intimate cage. We were trapped, and I was trapped with him. The silence that followed the shuddering halt was thick and heavy, broken only by the sound of our breathing and the distant, muted drumming of the rain. My own breath was shallow, caught high in my chest. My carefully ordered world had not just been disrupted. It had been brought to a dead, screeching halt in a metal box suspended 10 stories above the ground. My fortress had become a prison cell. "Are you okay?" Julian's voice cut through the thick air. It was still calm, that low, steady rumble, but now it was laced with a thread of concern that seemed to be aimed directly at me. I was pressed against the cool metal of the wall, my knuckles white where I gripped the handrail. I forced myself to nod, though in the dim, sickly light, I wasn't sure he could even see the gesture. "Yeah, I think so," I managed to say. My voice sounded thin, reedy. "You?" "I'm fine." He had barely moved during the jolt, a testament to his grounded physical presence. He was a rock, while I felt like a leaf in the wind. He pushed himself off the wall and moved to the control panel. The emergency light glinted off the gold band on his finger. It was there tonight. Of course it was. A solid, gleaming reminder of the shatterproof glass between us. He pressed the alarm button. A jarringly loud bell rang for a few seconds before cutting off. He then pressed the call button, holding it down. After a moment, a speaker crackled to life with a burst of static. "This is building security. Is there an emergency?" The voice was tinny, disembodied. "Yes," Julian said, his voice clear and authoritative. "We're stuck in elevator car 3. It dropped a few feet and stopped somewhere around the 9th floor. "Okay, sir. We see the fault on our end. The voice crackled back. The storm has caused some power surges throughout the building. We're dispatching the maintenance crew, but with the weather, it might take them a little while to get here. A little while, Julian repeated, his calm tone fraying just a little at the edges. Can you give us an estimate? Hard to say, sir. Could be an hour, could be a few. Just try to remain calm. We'll get to you as soon as we can. The speaker clicked off, plunging us back into a silence that was now filled with a new kind of tension, the tension of indefinite waiting. Julian let out a long, slow breath and turned away from the panel. He looked at me, his face half in shadow, half in the eerie green light. Well, he said, his attempt at levity not quite landing. Looks like we're going to be here for a while. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, my knees drawn up to my chest. It was the only thing I could think to do. My legs felt shaky, my mind a frantic buzz of worst-case scenarios. The small space, which moments ago had felt charged and electric, now felt suffocating, and it was becoming overwhelmingly filled with him. His scent was no longer a subtle background note. It was the very air I was breathing. Sandalwood and rain and something else, something uniquely him, warm and alive. I could hear the soft rustle of his wool suit trousers as he mirrored my action, sliding down the opposite wall to sit on the floor. We sat like that for a long time, in a silence that felt both awkward and strangely intimate. The only sounds were the faint patter of rain and the quiet, steady rhythm of his breathing, a stark contrast to the frantic drumming of my own heart. Our knees were only inches apart. I was hyper-aware of the space between us, a small strip of linoleum that felt like a vast, yawning canyon. I stared at it, focusing on the scuff marks, on anything other than the man sitting across from me. So, he said, his voice startling me. You're in graphic design, right? On 16. I looked up, surprised he knew. Yeah, Leo. I offered my name as if it were a fragile piece of glass. Julian, he said, though he had to know I already knew his. I've seen some of your team's work on the new corporate prospectus. It's good. Really clean. Thanks. I mumbled, a ridiculous warmth spreading through my chest. He'd seen my work. He'd noticed. It was a small thing, a professional courtesy, but in the charged atmosphere of our metal cage, it felt like a monumental admission. We talked for a bit after that. The conversation stilted and awkward at first, a clumsy dance of small talk. We talked about our jobs, the city, the absurdity of the storm. With every sentence, a tiny chip fell from the marble sculpture I had created in my mind, revealing the man underneath. He offered me a piece of mint gum from a pack in his pocket. As I took it, our fingers brushed. It was a fleeting, feather-like contact, but it sent a jolt through me, a spark of electricity that shot up my arm and straight to my heart. My skin tingled where he'd touched it. I quickly unwrapped the gum and put it in my mouth, the sharp, clean taste of menthol a welcome distraction from the sudden riot in my senses. The hours crawled by. The initial adrenaline faded, replaced by a weary resignation. The air grew thicker, warmer. At some point, Julian took off his suit jacket, folded it neatly, and placed it beside him. He rolled up the sleeves of his white shirt, revealing strong, capable forearms dusted with fine, dark hair. I tried not to stare, but it was impossible. In the confines of the elevator, every small detail about him was magnified, thrown into sharp relief. Then, he gave me a glimpse behind the curtain. He shifted his position, stretching his legs out, and let his head fall back against the wall with a soft thud. I have to admit, he said, his voice quieter now, more introspective. I'm not great with small spaces. I looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time. The unflappable, confident architect was gone. In his place was a man who looked tired and frayed around the edges. There was a tension in his jaw, a tightness around his eyes that I hadn't seen before. Claustrophobic? I asked softly. He gave a short, self-deprecating laugh. A little. My brothers used to lock me in a closet when we were kids. Guess it stuck. He turned his head to look at me, and his gaze was direct, vulnerable. Don't tell anyone on the 17th floor. It'll ruin my reputation as the unshakable project lead, he smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. It was a crack in the facade, a small, intimate confession that changed everything. He wasn't a sculpture in a museum. He was a person, with childhood fears and a carefully managed reputation. He continued talking, his voice low, the words filling the small space between us. He spoke about the immense pressure of his job, the weight of responsibility for budgets worth millions and buildings that would shape the city's skyline. He mentioned a project that had gone wrong a few years back, a miscalculation that had cost the firm dearly. He spoke of it with a lingering shame that felt raw and real. And then he brought up the ring. He held up his left hand, turning it in the dim light. "This was my dad's," he said, his voice soft with memory. "He passed away a couple of years ago. He was a builder. Always said you had to have a steady hand. I wear it on days I have a big presentation or a tough client meeting. For luck. For a steady hand." He paused, then looked at me again, his expression unreadable. "It's not what you probably think it is. My carefully constructed narrative, the one with the beautiful wife and the sun-drenched house, shattered into a million pieces. He wasn't married. He wasn't unavailable. The velvet rope and the shatterproof glass had been illusions, constructs of my own fear. All at once, the distance between us collapsed. The canyon became a thread, and the man across from me was suddenly, terrifyingly real. And the hope I had worked so hard to suppress began to stir, a dangerous, beautiful, and chaotic force awakening in the quiet of my heart. The air in the elevator had grown heavy, thick with our shared confessions and the passing of uncounted hours. A chill had begun to seep in through the metal walls, a damp cold that had nothing to do with the storm and everything to do with exhaustion and adrenaline finally, giving way to a bone-deep weariness. I shivered, a small, involuntary tremor that ran through my whole body. I tried to suppress it, wrapping my arms tighter around myself, but it was no use. He noticed. Of course he did. He seemed to notice everything. "You're cold," he stated, his voice a soft rumble in the quiet. It wasn't a question. I just nodded, my teeth chattering slightly. "A little." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. The space between us, which had felt so charged before, now just felt cold and empty. "We'd be warmer," he began, his voice hesitant, careful, "if we sat closer. Shared body heat." He said it like an architect proposing a practical, logical solution to a structural problem. But the look in his eyes was anything but practical. It was deep and searching, and it held a question that went far beyond simple thermodynamics. He was giving me an out. He was building a bridge and asking for my permission to cross. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, wild bird trapped in a cage. My fortress walls were crumbling, and the thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. All my life, I had chosen safety over risk, solitude over the possibility of connection. But sitting here, in this suspended metal box with him, the old rules felt arbitrary, meaningless. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. That was all the answer he needed. He shifted first, moving from his wall to the one I was leaning against, settling himself beside me. Then I moved, a small shuffle across the floor, until our sides were pressed together, from shoulder to hip. The contact was electric. A wave of warmth spread through me, so potent and immediate that it had nothing to do with the cold. It was him, the solid, living heat of him, seeping through the layers of our clothes, chasing away the chill. His shoulder was a firm pressure against mine. His thigh, a solid line of warmth next to my own. I could feel the subtle shift of his body with each breath he took. My own breathing hitched, and I forced myself to inhale slowly, trying to calm the storm that was now raging inside me. We sat in silence for a long time, side by side in the dim, greenish glow. The world outside, the city, our jobs, our separate lives, it all faded away. There was only the small, enclosed space, the sound of our breathing, and the overwhelming, undeniable reality of his body next to mine. This was the point of no return. I had stepped out of the museum, past the velvet ropes, and was now standing so close to the masterpiece that I could feel its warmth, its life. Slowly, as if in a dream, he turned his head. The emergency light carved his face into a landscape of shadow and gold. His eyes, dark and deep, found mine. He was so close now that I could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the slight parting of his lips. His gaze was intense, a silent conversation passing between us in the charged air. It dropped from my eyes to my lips, lingered there for a beat, and then rose to meet my eyes again, asking a final, unspoken question. He was giving me every opportunity to pull away, to retreat back to the safety of my fortress. But I didn't move. I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, held captive by a yearning so powerful it eclipsed a lifetime of fear. He leaned in. The movement was agonizingly slow, deliberate. It gave me time to register every sensation: the scent of sandalwood and mint, the soft sound of his breath, the heat coming off his skin. And then his lips met mine. It was not a kiss of passion or demand. It was a question, a discovery. It was impossibly soft, a gentle, tentative pressure that sent a shockwave through my entire system. It was hesitant, questioning, as if he was just as terrified and unsure as I was. His lips were warm and dry, and for a moment, that was all there was. A simple, profound connection. Then, he deepened the kiss ever so slightly, a silent invitation, and I responded, my own lips parting in a sigh of surrender. My mind, my overthinking, analytical brain, went completely offline. It was a system overload. All the anxieties, all the carefully constructed narratives, all the reasons why this was impossible, they all dissolved into nothing. There was no past, no future. There was only this moment. There was only the feeling of his lips on mine, the solid wall of his body anchoring me, the quiet hum of the universe converging on this single point of contact. The chaos I had spent my entire life trying to contain had finally broken free. And it was the most beautiful, terrifying, and exquisitely alive I had ever felt. My fortress had not just been breached, it had been leveled, and in its ruins, something new and fragile was beginning to grow. The world came back with a violent lurch. A groan of protesting metal, a sudden upward movement, and then the blinding glare of normal light flooding the elevator car as the main power kicked back on. The spell was shattered. We broke apart instantly, scrambling away from each other as if burned, retreating to opposite sides of the car. The intimacy of the darkness was gone, replaced by the harsh, unforgiving reality of fluorescent lighting. I couldn't look at him. My face was on fire, and I stared resolutely at my own shoes, my heart still hammering a wild, syncopated rhythm against my ribs. The elevator resumed its descent, and a moment later, the doors chimed and slid open onto the ground floor lobby. Two maintenance workers in greasy overalls stood there, looking surprised to see us. "There you are," one of them said. "Power's been on and off all over the block. You two all right?" "We're fine," Julian said, his voice sounding strained, rougher than usual. He grabbed his jacket and strode out of the elevator without a backward glance. I mumbled my own thanks and followed him out, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. The lobby was filled with the gray, watery light of dawn. The storm had passed. Outside, the air was cool and smelled of rain-washed asphalt. Julian was already several feet ahead of me, his broad back a clear and unequivocal statement. He didn't turn. He didn't wait. He just hailed the first passing cab, got in, and was gone. The silence he left behind was a physical thing, a gaping chasm that had opened up between us, wider and more terrifying than the space between our knees had ever been. The man who had shared his fears and his warmth with me in the dark was gone, replaced by a stranger who couldn't get away from me fast enough. The walk home was a blur. My mind was a maelstrom of recrimination and panic. What had I done? What had we done? The kiss, which had felt so real, so profound in the suspended reality of the elevator, now seemed like a reckless, insane mistake in the cold light of day. It was a product of fear and proximity, a moment of temporary insanity. It couldn't have meant anything. He regretted it. That was the only possible explanation for his hasty retreat, for the wall of silence he had erected between us. I called in sick on Friday. I couldn't face the possibility of seeing him, of sharing another silent, awkward elevator ride. I spent the entire day, and then the entire weekend, in a self-imposed quarantine, pacing my apartment like a caged animal. My orderly home felt alien, its clean lines and quiet spaces mocking me. My fortress had been breached, and I had no idea how to rebuild the walls. In fact, I wasn't sure I wanted to. My anxiety spiral was relentless. I replayed every second of our time in the elevator, analyzing every word, every gesture. His confession about his father's ring. Was it a genuine moment of vulnerability, or just a way to pass the time? His admission of claustrophobia, a strategic move to elicit sympathy? My mind, so skilled at creating narratives, was now working overtime to construct the most painful ones imaginable. I had misread everything. I had taken a moment of shared crisis and twisted it into something it wasn't. I had ruined the quiet, distant admiration that had been so safe. Now, there would be nothing but awkwardness. I would have to find a new job. Maybe I'd move to a different city, start over where no one knew the name Julian Vance. The scenarios grew more catastrophic with each passing hour. He didn't call. He didn't text. Of course he didn't. He probably didn't even have my number. The silence from his end was a confirmation of my deepest fears. For him, it had meant nothing. Monday morning felt like a death sentence. Putting on my clothes, making my coffee, walking to the office. Every routine action felt like a step towards the gallows. I was a ghost at my own desk, jumping at every footstep, my stomach in a permanent, nauseous knot. I took the stairs up to the 16th floor, unable to face the elevator. I made it until lunchtime, hiding behind my monitor, drowning myself in work. Then, an email notification popped up on my screen. The sender was Julian Vance. The subject line contained 2 words, coffee. My blood ran cold. This was it. The official, let's pretend this never happened conversation. The corporate-sanctioned erasure of our shared hours in the dark. My fingers trembled as I typed back a single word. Okay. We met in the soulless cafe on the building's mezzanine level, a place of beige walls and uncomfortable chairs. He was already there, sitting at a small table in the corner, staring into a cup of black coffee. He looked as tired and anxious as I felt. The easy confidence I had always admired from afar was gone, replaced by a raw, nervous energy that mirrored my own. I sat down without a word. The silence stretched, thick and unbearable. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just kept staring at his coffee cup as if it held the answers to the universe. Finally, he cleared his throat. Leo, he began, his voice low, we need to talk about the other night. I braced myself for the blow, for the apology, the regret, the polite but firm dismissal. I understand, I said quickly, the words rushing out of me in a desperate attempt to get it over with. It was a weird situation. We were both stressed. It didn't mean anything. We can just forget it. He finally looked up, and the expression on his face stopped me cold. It wasn't pity or annoyance. It was a deep, heart-wrenching pain. Is that what you think? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. That it meant nothing? I didn't know what to say. I just stared at him, my pre-written script suddenly useless. He took a deep, shaky breath. Leo, I have been noticing you for months, he confessed, the words quiet but carrying the weight of a profound truth. In the elevator, in the lobby. I know you're the designer who worked on the Kendrick project because I specifically asked who did. I've been trying to figure out a way to talk to you, a way that wasn't just me, the architect from 17, cornering you by the coffee machine. But I kept losing my nerve. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized, but now I saw it not as a sign of deep thought, but of deep anxiety. What happened in that elevator? It wasn't about being stressed or trapped. For me, it was the opposite. It was a moment of absolute clarity. Everything just stopped. And all I could think was that if I didn't do something, if I didn't take that one risk, I would regret it for the rest of my life. He looked down at his hands, at the gold ring he was twisting around and around his finger. I haven't been with a man before. This is all new to me, and it's terrifying. But the thought of not exploring whatever this is, that's even more terrifying. He looked up at me again, his eyes pleading. It meant something to me, Leo. It meant everything. The dam inside me didn't just break, it was obliterated. All the fear, the anxiety, the carefully constructed walls of self-protection were washed away in a flood of overwhelming, heart-stopping relief. I thought you were married, I whispered, the words sounding foolish now. I know, he said with a sad smile. The ring. It's a crutch, a connection to my dad. But it's not a commitment to anyone else. I've been single for over a year, he paused. I thought you weren't interested. You were always so quiet, so self-contained. I thought I was the only one feeling this. No, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You weren't the only one, and then I told him everything. About watching him from afar, about the foolish stories I'd invented, about the certainty I had that he was a beautiful, unattainable work of art. I told him how I'd cataloged his habits, the sound of his voice, the scent of his cologne, all from the safe distance of my own lonely world. The relief was a physical sensation, a massive weight lifting from my chest, allowing me to breathe freely for the first time in days. He listened to it all, his expression shifting from surprise to a dawning, incredible tenderness. When I finished, he reached across the table and his hand covered mine. His touch was warm, firm, and real. "Can we get out of here?" he asked. We left our coffees untouched and walked out of the building, into the bright, chilly afternoon. We didn't speak. We just walked, his hand still holding mine, until we reached a small, quiet park a few blocks away. Away from the glass and steel of the office, away from the ghosts of our old assumptions. He stopped under the bare branches of a large oak tree and turned to face me. He raised his free hand, his fingers gently cupping my jaw. His thumb stroked my cheek, and it was the most reassuring gesture I had ever felt. "Leo," he said, my name a soft prayer on his lips. And then he kissed me again. This kiss was nothing like the first one. There was no hesitation, no questioning. It was sure and deep and certain. A kiss full of all the words we had just spoken and all the feelings we had held back for so long. It was a kiss of relief, of recognition, of profound, unbelievable joy. It wasn't about chaos or the crumbling of walls. It was about building something new. It tasted of coffee and mint and the promise of a new beginning. It felt like coming home. The days that followed felt like learning to breathe a new kind of air. We decided to keep things quiet at work, not out of shame, but out of a shared desire to protect this fragile, new thing we were building. It became our secret, a warm, glowing ember we carried with us through the sterile hallways and beige conference rooms. Our interactions were now coded with a secret language, a lingering glance across a crowded lobby, a brief, almost imperceptible smile in the elevator, the way his hand would brush mine for a split second longer than necessary when passing me a document in a meeting. These small moments were charged with a delicious, private energy. Our first real date was at a tiny Italian restaurant tucked away on a side street I had never noticed before. The kind of place with checkered tablecloths and candles dripping wax into old wine bottles. Away from the context of our office building, he seemed different, looser, younger. He laughed more, a deep, genuine sound that made my chest ache with affection. We talked for hours, filling in the vast, empty spaces that had previously been occupied by my own fabricated narratives. I learned that his favorite color was the deep blue of the sky just after sunset, that he was a terrible cook but made a perfect old-fashioned, and that his confident, authoritative presence at work was a carefully constructed armor to hide a persistent case of imposter syndrome. In turn, I told him things I had never told anyone. I spoke of my quiet, solitary childhood, my tendency to live more in my head than in the world, my fear of disruption. I confessed that my obsession with order and routine was just a defense mechanism against a world that felt too loud, too chaotic, too overwhelming. He didn't try to fix me. He just listened, his dark eyes filled with a profound understanding that made me feel seen in a way I never had before. He didn't see my fortress walls as a flaw. He saw them as the blueprint of a person who had learned to protect himself. And he made it clear he wanted to be invited inside, not to tear them down, but to help me install a door. Our lives began to merge in small, quiet ways. A toothbrush in my bathroom holder. A collection of his favorite architectural magazines on my coffee table. My apartment, once a silent sanctuary of solitude, was now frequently filled with the low rumble of his voice, the sound of his music, the scent of his skin on my pillows. My routine, once a rigid, unchangeable structure, began to bend. A spontaneous midweek movie, a weekend trip to a small coastal town, an evening spent doing nothing but lying on the couch, my head on his chest, listening to the steady, reassuring rhythm of his heart. The chaos I had feared for so long didn't feel like chaos at all. It felt like life. One evening, a few weeks later, we were at his apartment. It was exactly as I should have guessed. Minimalist, impeccably clean, with beautiful, interesting furniture and one wall lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. A sudden thunderstorm rolled in, the same kind of violent, sudden squall as the one on that fateful night. The lights in his building flickered, dimmed, and then went out completely, plunging us into a sudden, deep darkness. For a split second, a ghost of the old panic surfaced in me. The feeling of being trapped, of being powerless. Then, I felt Julian's arm wrap around me, pulling me closer against his side. A moment later, The emergency lights in his building kicked on, casting the room in a familiar, dim glow. We looked at each other. A slow, conspiratorial grin spread across his face, the crinkles by his eyes appearing in the soft light. "Claustrophobic?" he asked, his voice a low, teasing murmur that vibrated through his chest and into my ear. I laughed, a real, unburdened sound. The memory was no longer a source of anxiety, but a shared touchstone, the strange, miraculous origin story of us. "Only when I'm not with you," I replied, and the truth of the words settled deep in my bones. He kissed me then, a slow, tender kiss in the semi-darkness that felt like a perfect echo of our beginning. It was a reaffirmation, a promise. The power came back on a few minutes later, but we stayed right where we were, content in the quiet space we had carved out for ourselves. Now, sitting at my desk, the afternoon sun slanting across my keyboard, my life feels both unrecognizable and more authentically mine than it ever has before. The foundations are the same. I still love the clean lines of a good design, the quiet satisfaction of a project well done. But the emotional architecture has been completely rebuilt. The high, impenetrable walls have been replaced with windows, letting in light and air. My phone buzzes on the desk. A text from Julian. "Dinner tonight?" I'm thinking of attempting that pasta dish again, followed by a string of emojis that clearly indicates he expects it to be a disaster. I smile, typing back, "I'll bring the fire extinguisher." My old life was a fortress, meticulously designed to keep the world, with all its messy, unpredictable emotions, at a safe distance. I was the keeper of my own museum, the sole resident of my own quiet prison. I had thought I was safe, but I was just alone. Julian didn't just get stuck in an elevator with me that night. He got stuck in the quiet, ordered corridors of my life and, with his gentle, steady presence, showed me that the door had been unlocked the whole time. The risk I had been so terrified of taking wasn't a risk of loss, but a risk of discovery. It was the risk of learning that the chaos I feared was just another word for love. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to step outside and live in the beautiful, unpredictable world he was building with me.